Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby. And today we're going to go over our fantasy football wide receiver rankings, or 1.0. There's a lot that goes into the wide receiver rankings. There's a ton of wide receivers, and certain teams have enough volume to support 3 receivers. Some teams don't have that volume. Some teams have a true number one, while other teams have a committee of guys. Mm-hmm. So getting that kind of sorted out is something that we try to do really well here. We've done our receiver rankings, I feel like, are really good, and we've done really good in the past. So I'm really confident that, following this stuff, you're going to do really well in your fantasy football league. So.
Right. And yeah, there's just so many names. It's like these tiers are huge and massive. Over the last couple of years, running back has really just gone way down in ADP, and receivers have risen up. Rookie receivers are becoming more consistently productive, and so you're seeing these rookie guys going higher than ever before, 2 of them higher than we've ever seen. And then on top of that, guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who had fantastic rookie seasons that were going in the 7th to 10th rounds. Well, you got like 7 receivers that are rookies going in those ranges right now. And obviously not all of them will pay off, but there's so many that we have to cover because essentially in the top 100 overall ADP, right, for every one running back, there's 2 wide receivers. Mm-hmm. Like your top 50 receivers are going to be in the first 100 picks.
Right, exactly.
And possibly more. So that's why we just want to jump right into it. So we'll start off with tier 7. Essentially, somebody's got to get targets. A lot of these guys in situations with opportunity as number 2s or possible number 1s in lower tier offenses as well. We'll kick it off with this tier right here.
Yeah, so looking at Darnell Mooney, he's going to fight for the opportunity to be the number 2 receiver in Atlanta. Him and Rondale Moore, he's right at 60 for us. I think that, he's a little nerve-wracking player, and that's why he's down here, because you haven't seen super production out of him before. But getting Kirk Cousins, maybe that pushes him to the next level. Being in a better offense, there's guys around him that are going to take some of the other balls away from him. So he's probably a 5-target player, and he can break off big plays.
But you never know. I mean, with Kirk Cousins, he's gotten plenty of times where over in his years in Washington and in Minnesota, where multiple guys have been fantasy relevant, even though, he's had certain ones that just were top of the league in targets or whatever. There's still KJ Osborne moments and Adam Thielen runs where he's putting up historical numbers next to Stephon Diggs and all that good stuff. And Darnell Mooney's a former 1,000-yard receiver. He's only 26 years old. And, somebody's got to get targets in that offense. And obviously Kyle Pitts and Drake London are the 1 and 2 in terms of receiving targets. Bijan is going to get a ton of opportunities this year as well. But somebody's a deep threat guy. Somebody else has to be the gadget guy. And that's why they brought in Rondale Moore and Darnell Mooney, 2 former second-round picks off of bad situations. And so, one of them can pay off, especially at their ADPs right now.
Right. And then let's talk about the Charger tandem in this range. You've got Josh Palmer at 53 and then Quentin Johnston at 59. Quentin Johnston, former first round pick, guy that we expected to do much better than he had, obviously, last year. He had a freshman slump, I guess you could say. And we're not sure what's going to happen. We don't know who the number 1 receiver is going to be for the Chargers. Josh Palmer, though, has been a guy that has taken advantage of his opportunities when he was the number 1, number 2 guy. Keenan Allen has been injured. Mike Williams were injured when they were there. Now they're gone. So vacated targets is something that we look at a lot. They're going to be a run-first offense, but somebody is going to do well in this offense. And there's a 3-headed monster, basically, with Ladd McConkey, who's not on the board. But between these 2 guys, I feel we've been getting actually a lot of both of them in best ball because, as you can see, we're higher than them based on their average rank and their ADP. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with both of them, we're roughly over about 20% or more for some of them. Even Josh Palmer is at wide receiver 5 is really intriguing right now because just the gap between him and Ladd McConkey, who we love him as a prospect and we love the fit and all that good stuff, but he has never had a fantasy relevant season coming from Georgia. So there's not a lot of optimism that he could just come in and be the I heard somebody the other day compare him to what Puka Nacua. It's like Puka Nacua had volume when he was in college. He was just a lower, tier school and just not crazy known. But he killed it throughout the draft process, and people that slept on him, if you paid attention throughout the draft process, that was one of the early names that you pulled out. That was just like he won every route, and he was just killing it. And then, he goes to the Rams, who Matt Stafford loves just targets to receivers. And when Cooper Kupp went down, he stepped right in and killed it. And I don't see Ladd doing that because he's in a low volume pass offense. Like you said, they want to have somebody carry it 300 times this year. And on top of that, Jim Harbaugh has never been a guy that just, my quarterback's going to have 4,000 yards and, we're going to just have a bunch of receivers have production. But somebody has to, take some, possible targets in this offense. I mean, I think the number we tweeted out last week, it was like over 65% of the targets are vacant.
I think.
Because Gerald Everett's gone, Austin Eckler, obviously Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So basically your top 4 options are gone. By default, somebody's falling into it. And Josh Palmer has had successful tenures when he stepped in for either Keenan or Mike or both when they went down over the last couple of years. I mean, games of like 25, 30 fantasy points is his upside. And he's going in the 120 overall range. Quinn Johnston, obviously atrocious rookie season. But we've also seen receivers kind of struggle, and then their second year is when they really kind of step into their own. And it also didn't help when a lot of the time Justin Herbert wasn't healthy. So right now he's going in the 160s. That's not that rough of a investment or a risk, and especially if you're hitting early on, because like we said, the kind of strategy that we're mostly going towards is like 4 to 5 in the first 8 rounds, and then kind of take some dart throws on these guys in good offenses or that have opportunity. And him as a wide receiver 6 or Palmer as a wide receiver 5 is not anything that I would be upset about with my best ball team.
Yeah, and like we talked about with Ladd McConkey during our scouting stuff, he's not a true number 1. He's going to be he's a number 2 in an offense for his style of play. Now, a lot of teams need number 2s, obviously, but he fits that better. So who could be the number 1 in this offense? We don't know yet. We'll talk about Ladd McConkey in a little while, but one of the other guys that we're getting a ton of is Xavier Legette. He sits in this range. He's, the new shiny thing for Bryce Young. Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jatavian Sanders, Adam Thielen. No names that really just like scream amazing, but they're going to get the volume, especially because I expect them to play from behind. Things like that, of course, is important when you're thinking about targeting offense. And I think Bryce Young also takes a step forward from one of the worst seasons ever. I think he has to, or he will not be the starter come week 7 probably. So people have to. Xavier Legette, though, is a beneficiary of that. So
yeah, I mean, with Carolina, we've talked about a little that we've invested a lot in this offense early on in our best ball teams, and it's because their strength of schedule, one of the easiest in the NFL. They're the number 1 strength of schedule positively for quarterbacks and number 2 for receivers.
Right.
And like you said, they're going to play from behind a lot. You would think to see improvements with Bryce Young. Terrible rookie season, but they added so many pieces around him. And whether it's Deontay, Adam Thielen, or Xavier Legette, I think that there are moments where each of them will have their stretches. Obviously, Deontay will be a wide receiver 4 in redrafts, maybe a wide receiver 4 or 5 in best ball, and you have to invest some in him because he's going in the top 80, 85. But with these guys, Xavier Legette's going in the 130s or even 150s, and that's in best ball, which is his highest ADP. He's not even he's an afterthought in redraft. He will be undrafted. Adam Thielen, he will probably be undrafted, and so great waiver wire. Week 3, 4, first 3 weeks, Adam Thielen had 6 targets, and then either he goes down or Xavier Legette's finally kind of picking up snaps, and that's kind of the foresight I see for him. It's a long-term investment. I don't expect any of them really out of the gate, outside of Deontay by default to instantly produce. But it's really, I think, a long-term gain for where they're going right now.
Yeah, they really tried to give Bryce Young some pieces this offseason. So we'll see how the Panthers pan out. And then our first Washington player, Jahan Dotson, getting a new quarterback, getting a new offensive coordinator, getting a new head coach, all the things. That's, of course, something that's interesting. But Jahan Dotson was a first round pick. Very important to remember that. Those things are, they will not want to move off of him if he is being productive. He's been productive. And
it's a big year for him because, this is after this season, they're going to have to decide if they want that fifth-year option. And that's huge in receivers because of the spike. It's the highest, fifth-year option out of any other position that's not a quarterback. So you really want to make sure that, contract years is usually where we kind of target people for narrative purposes too.
For sure.
Like fifth-year option is honestly becoming that as well. Even though he can be tied down to this team, like you need to show up and show out so you can get that money because it's really kind of becoming like we're paying you a bag or you're going to be,
the next number three paid wide receiver on a team for sure. No, I completely agree. And then Dallas's first receiver, high-powered offense, Brandon Cooks, currently is the number 2 receiver when you look at it on the board. I mean, you can make the case that Jake Ferguson's going to get more targets than him. But receiver-wise, he's number 2 behind CeeDee Lamb, kind of a funnel over there. So I think that Brandon Cooks is interesting. I think that all of these guys are interesting because he's a number 2, and he has to get targets. That's what, someone has to get targets. Well, he's the number 2. How could he not get targets, right?
Yeah, I mean, with him, he's kind of one of the makes me the most nervous about just throughout the year. He's just going to be consistent for you. I can see paths for all of these guys to just consistently be wide receiver 3s and 4s on a weekly basis. And with him, I think there was a lot of games where he's just 4 targets, but he also has stretches where he goes 9 for 173 and 4 for 72 in a tug and kind of out of nowhere 8 touchdowns last year. And he's always been somewhat consistent with production in the grand scheme of things. If you look at his totals to finish the year, he's always in the 20s to 40 range.
Right.
And I don't expect really much different, but it's just when we're getting to this range, we're looking for wide receiver 5s. Most of these guys, like I said, will be undrafted and redrafted, and we're just going to be doing sprinkles here and there. But in best ball, I want boom weeks. And can he continuously, as he approaches his age 30 season, get to the 9 for 173s when we see other guys, a lot of talent here that is former first and second round picks, or guys that have put together the 150 yards more than a couple times in a year,
for sure,
in a season. So by default he has to be on here because there's just not much else. But if you told me that he was just a bust or he was banged up and Jalen Tolbert was the guy who was going way, way lower, I'm not surprised either.
Right, of course. And then Rashid Shaheed, talk about your boom weeks, right?
Yeah.
Dude will go for randomly 3 touchdowns for 200 yards and on 4 catches. It's ridiculous. And they run end rounds with him. They do things like that. They try to get this guy the ball. Michael Thomas being gone, he's kind of the old regime feel, he's like the bridge between the Michael Thomas, the Chris Olave era. But he is a guy that has those boom week opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, last year, looking at his numbers, only 4 games that he had more than 6 targets. But boom weeks are stuff like 2 for 85 in a tuggy, 3 for 153 in a touchdown, 5 for 89 on his 6 targets, and 3 for 65 for a touchdown. Those are the kind of, and one of those was, week 18. Mm-hmm. So if you invested wherever he went last year, he wasn't high, you got 18 points out of it to end the season. And that was huge and could have made a huge difference. So that's exactly what you're looking for. And Chris Olave, even though he is by default number 1, he's an early draft pick for a reason. Michael Thomas is not there anymore, and Derek Carr likes to spread it around, and he also likes to throw deep. So, he will have those occasional games, and he's going in the range where you just need 5-6 good weeks,
right?
And he's going to provide that. So that's why we like him.
And then Jerry Jeudy, a former first-round pick, Another guy that, in this range that we keep talking about hasn't necessarily broke out and had that big season. He was playing for the Broncos next to Cortland Sutton. Now he goes and plays next to Amari Cooper. Can Deshaun Watson return to form is one of the biggest questions, I think, with this. And then also, like, is Jerry Jeudy, going to do some of the old things that he was able to do with the route running and things like that we had seen.
Yeah, he's just been a frustrating guy. I mean, he's somebody that I have missed on multiple times since we started doing best ball because he was a fourth or fifth round pick for 3 straight years. And,
right.
1 year he did pan out, but the other 2 years, it's just way too inconsistent, and it's frustrating. Also, the quarterback play, there's no denying it, but there's effort issues, and then there's also just consistency issues, and you can't deal with it sometimes. But I kind of compare it similar to Elijah Moore when he's a former second round pick that gets traded to Cleveland last offseason. He gets vaulted as the default wide receiver 2 option because really the next guy was Donovan Peoples-Jones. He is by default, and then he was a wide receiver 4 range, and we didn't take a ton of him, and obviously he didn't work out. But this is a much better player, better situational fit,
right?
And he's going like 50 spots lower.
Yeah.
So it's where he's going is where I like it, and that's what really matters to me. I don't know because we still have yet to see the consistent volume from Deshaun Watson, but I know if he goes down again, Jameis Winston is a guy that likes to throw it for 300 yards and 3 picks. So we saw with Joe Flacco last year with Amari Cooper rising and then David Njoku being the tight end 1 for the final 6 or 7 weeks of the season where the volume was there to be had. And even Elijah Moore had a couple of boom weeks finally. He's going to wide receiver 5 range, and that's exactly what he can provide as the third option in this passing offense.
Yep. And then the last guy on this list is Tyler Lockett, a guy that is just slowly getting kicked out of the offense. DK gets extended. JSN gets drafted. It just feels like Tyler Lockett's the odd man out right now.
Mm-hmm.
But he just consistently puts up good seasons. And I think he's just good at football. It's just what it is. Sitting here at 52, we actually have him lower than rankings because we just don't know that he is the number 3. He is the number 3, guys. He will be the number 3. And can he find the targets to, be ahead of all of these guys? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about consistency. You look at it over the last 5 years. He had 10 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, 9 touchdowns, all over 100 targets. All averaging about 80 catches, over 1,000 yards. And then last year was his worst season, but he still had 80 catches, 900 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So, if you don't believe in JSN, he's one of my highest risers. We'll talk about him. Or if you don't believe in DK, finally rising into being a true number 1.
Right.
Just go with Old Faithful, and he probably won't let you down. Again, Seattle is one that we do like the passing situation with what they bring. And it's just kind of a tricky one because we don't believe in Geno Smith, but they invested in a backup that, they can still put together good production if he goes down. Right. It's not like they're seeing a dip. Sam Howell, led the league in passing for the first 7 weeks of the year. And, that's by design because they were just trailing every game. Mm-hmm. Seattle, they're fighting to not be the worst team in the division. They're still good enough to, if they make a wild card spot, we're not surprised by it necessarily. But they're going to be competitive in the thick of things. And most games they're going to be, having to stay in some way, shape, or form. So, another guy that we can't ignore.
Right, of course. And then Spike Week's probable, tier 6. Spike Week's probable, consistency unlikely. First guy, he's our lowest differential, and it makes a lot of sense. From where we sit, we do think that there will be a suspension for all of the different allegations that we've seen. In Rashee Rice, he's about 11 and a half spots back, and I think that, he probably cannot get away with what he did again with the NFL, and there's probably going to be some sort of backlash. And then, of course, if he does have to sit out 3 or 6 weeks, you miss the consistency. There's the unlikeliness. And he's also going to walk into an offense that's a lot better with a lot better players. I don't know where he would sit. Is he wide receiver 3? Is he wide receiver 4? Or is he, not wide receiver. Is he option 4? So that's the big question with him.
Here's my problem with him. if there was no suspension and he was goody two shoes on his best behavior, I would still think that his average rank of ADP at 78 is too high.
Yeah, agreed.
And yet it's there with the looming suspension. So essentially, he is the Jameson Williams situation from last year on crack. Based on Jameson Williams, we knew he was getting suspended 6 games, and he was still going around 100th overall,
Right.
which is late 8th, early 9th round pick. And Rashee Rice right now is going in the 7th round consistently. You have to invest in him as your wide receiver 4. And I don't even know if he can consistently put together numbers. He, by default, did last year because he was the only one that wasn't dropping passes.
Right.
But now, when you bring in Marquise Brown, who has had multiple top wide receiver 2 seasons, you have Xavier Worthy,
Right.
who I don't know really what to do with him and like projecting his stat line, but he's going to take away targets. I know that
for sure.
And then Travis Kelce will still be a 1,000-yard threat again. So unless Mahomes is back to his 5,000-yard throwing, which is completely feasible, I just don't see the reason to go to him right now where he's currently going. If his ADP dips, that's cool. But I'm still seeing articles of people who you should buy low on, and his name is in there. And I'm like, no, his name should be in the who are too high to sell right now, and then
sure.
Wait. Like maybe if he drops to the outside the top 100, and we want some Patrick Mahomes sprinkles because he's our QB2 above consensus, and we want some pieces of that offense. Cool, I'm fine with that. But I'm not investing my wide receiver 3 or 4
right.
in a guy that I don't even know if he's going to play half the season.
Yeah.
And it's just too much of an unknown to be going where he's currently going. And he's the one outlier of this because even when he returns, I don't know if he's going to just walk into 10 targets like he was towards the end of last season.
He would be in this range. He would be
in this range, completely healthy, no suspension whatsoever. And yet people are viewing him as a value right now, which we're just completely off of.
Well, I'll say it again. I believe that, he was a 3rd-round draft pick, and Marquise Brown was a 1st-round draft pick. Xavier Worthy was a 1st-round draft pick. And I think that, there was no other talent in Kansas City. Everybody dropped the ball, like you said. Now there's guys that won't do that. And does he come back just like some people believe if he was on the field, he would be the number 1 option other than Travis Kelce probably.
Right.
I just don't see that because there's so much talent now compared to the old talent that was there. So I digress. But moving up, we have a guy that has some positive differential in Jacoby Meyer. He is a guy that, is just good at football, consistent. Him and Devontae, like him being the number 2 behind Devontae, he's been really good. And I'm excited that he's on my team. So
right. I mean, last year coming off a career high 8 touchdowns, 800 yards for the 3rd straight season, over 100 targets. The only thing is just if you're trusting the quarterback. And also, we actually are surprisingly getting a lot of Raiders based on where they're going. I mean, Devontae Adams by default has been our favorite wide receiver 2 when we're drafting, unless somebody just kind of falls unsuspectingly. Zamir White we love as a running back 3, let alone if we're going hero RB and he's our running back 2, we're fine with that. Rob Bowers, most exposed tight end. So it's like, we need another Raider. And that's the only kind of nerve-wracking thing when I'm hearing Aiden O'Connell is beating out Gardner Minshew right now. And who knows if that's true. I mean, maybe the Fu Manchu can just kind of turn it around and,
sure.
make some magic happen, which is, in the realm of possibilities. But it's just we're not looking to double and triple stack the Raiders, and he's kind of the 4th option, and it's not like he's necessarily a value. We kind of have him right where everybody else does right now.
Right, for sure. He's just a guy that we like as a football player, more so than where he's at ADP was. And then Curtis Samuel, he Buffalo is kind of like what we talked about with the Chargers, except for we expect them to have more volume. They have a rookie receiver in Keon Coleman, who we'll get to. And then they have Curtis Samuel, they have Shakur, and then Dalton Kincaid. But we don't know who the number 1's going to be. We have no clue. No one really does. Curtis Samuel has been productive in the past. He's been a good slot receiver-esque guy. and he's electrifying when he has the ball in his hands at times. It's just we don't know what to do with. I don't personally know what to do with the Buffalo guys.
I think he's going to shock people with how good he is early in the year.
He's very good at football.
Not only is he good at football, but while we're getting, Keon Coleman into the thick of things, and obviously we love Dalton Kincaid as well. We've been getting a ton of him, and he's our tight end 3, which we're the only ones that really have him as a top 3, which is nobody's low on him, but we're even higher. And he's just a reliable guy that is basically Cole Beasley on steroids.
Right.
And Cole Beasley in his first 3 years in Buffalo, 106 targets, 107 targets, 112 targets, 82 catches in 2 of those years. Touchdown numbers weren't up, and also that was when they brought in Stephon Diggs, so he wasn't necessarily getting the red zone looks, targets, but he was the moving the chains guy. And so when they're looking for somebody to move the chains, I think they're going to look for somebody that is a really talented football player that can produce. And he was just kind of in the log jam in Washington, and Terry McLaurin he's a very good football player as well, but he's been their wide receiver 1. Then they invested in Jahan Dotson, so he's really they're trying to force him to be the third man, and then he moves on to an offense where he could possibly be the one man.
Right.
And it excites us a lot where he's at, and I don't get the love for Khalil Shakir basically going at the same spot as him.
Right.
He is so much more talented of a football player than him. They're the same guy. And it's not like both of them are going to be out on 2 receiver sets. It's going to be Chase Claypool and one of them, or eventually Keon Coleman and one of them. And then 3 receiver sets, maybe you have 2 of them.
Right.
But Shakir is not going to get on the field nearly as much as Curtis Samuel will. And like I said, early on, he's as safe as a bet. And, if his, value on, weekly DraftKings and fantasy spots, if it's under 5,000, we're going to be clicking a lot early in the year.
Oh, yeah. And I've clicked on him a lot in past years because he's been under that because of the fact that he was on Washington with 2 other good players and Carolina with DJ Moore. Mm-hmm. So he's never been a number 1 receiver. He doesn't really have that style, but he is a guy that 1,000 yards isn't going to surprise you.
To me, he is. I can compare him to just draft wise where he's going and the role he could provide. He's Jerome Ford of the receivers.
Right.
Early on,
Absolutely.
like first 8 weeks of the year, if he's in the wide receiver 2 range, I'm not shocked at all because whatever. But I don't know late season what's going to happen with Buffalo.
It's cold.
And then if they're going to try to force stuff to Keon or whatever. But early on, I feel very comfortable. Similar to Jerome Ford, where I don't know if Nate Chubb will be back, but I think early on he's going to be at least 1B at worst and getting 12 to 15 touches. So
yeah. And then Jameson Williams, one of the most exciting guys right now. Mm-hmm. Not sure if I completely am on the hype train yet. And that's something that, obviously you can see by our rankings, we're right where everybody else is. Mm-hmm. But I've heard a lot of people want to talk about him thinking that he'll be the number 2, finally step into it, finally do the things we expected. He was a first-round draft pick. But gambling issues, injuries, things like that have just hindered him. Can he do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's his first fully healthy offseason in a Super Bowl contending offense. The only thing is there's just so many players that are going to get the ball, and he's basically kind of in the tier that we saw earlier, Rashid Shaheed. He should be a better version of that. I mean, he's a former first-round pick, national championship. Like, he's well on his way to being the MVP of the game. And, tears his ACL, unfortunately. I mean, his ADP right now is very split in terms of redraft versus best ball. Like, he's in the top 90 now in both DraftKings and Underdog. And then he hasn't cracked the top 100 in any of the redraft leagues. And even ESPN, who's PPR, which probably makes more sense based on his style, has him at 130. So I'll take some sprinkles there, but we're not playing ESPN. So
not at 90.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just kind of where he's going. And right now his trend is up. And we're kind of like, we thought he was good right here. And y'all are trying to bring him further. And so it's kind of pulling us away. But we see the reason behind the upside. We just don't know if it'll come to fruition.
Yeah, people are trying to push him upwards. And I don't know that I'm following as much.
Right.
And then let's group these next 3. Why don't we?
That's exactly what I was going to do.
three solid rookie players, and we liked all of them coming out. That was something that, you look at all those guys, we were higher on all of them almost than where they went in the draft itself. So Roma Dunze, the new Bear, he's the third option off the rip. There is probably no way he beats out DJ Moore or Keenan Allen for targets, and that's why he's slower in our on our side. Lad McConkey, we talked about him and his team and what he be the number one, and then Brian Thomas Jr. He might have the best opportunity out of all of them to be the best of this group because of the fact that he's going to play with Trevor Lawrence. He's going to be the number one target on the outside, most likely. Gabe Davis, inconsistent. And then Evan Ingram is probably the guy. Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk are probably the guys that challenge him for targets, but his targets are farther down the field.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, to me with Rome, again, this is not a if we like him as a football player, we love them, all of them as football players, and then as fits, we like them all too. But we're trying to separate that from real life football and fantasy football. And Rome has one of our biggest negative correlations, and it's largely because they just had a target hog come into their offense, and they already have a wide receiver one there as well. We just think it'll be a slow burn for him. And, dynasty wise, buy him. Top 5 pick. But right now, I think if you're trying to rely on him as a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, I just don't know if he's going to be consistent enough for you. Same with Ladd. Like I mentioned previously, we love him as a player, but he just has not consistently, from a statistical standpoint, put it together to where he's going as a wide receiver 3 right now.
Right.
And it's because, again, there's so many just unknowns with the target discrepancy and who departed from the Chargers. But is he 60 picks different than Quinn Johnston? Probably not. Definitely not 40 compared to Josh Palmer.
Yeah.
So it's like if I'm going for Justin Herbert stacks, which he's at a value too because he's QB 17, he's never had a non-top 15 season in terms of average points per game. I just think they're trying to put wishful thinking into it, and we'll see. I could be proven wrong, and I wouldn't be surprised, but I just need to see more to put him higher than where we have him right now.
The rookie narrative. So,
yeah. And like you said with Brian Thomas, we love him as well. And Calvin Ridley, who was their number one, is no longer there. We don't see Gabe Davis, who basically is filling in for Zay Jones. Mm-hmm. That's kind of his role. He's going to have 600-700 yards maybe, and then the occasional 40-yard bomb. But I mean, he's not going to consistently eat away from a snap share perspective. And then Christian Kirk, I think, will be the most consistent, which is why he's so much higher in terms of ADP. But Brian Thomas right now, he's going lower than every other rookie in that range. Like ADP-wise, he's the lowest of Ladd and Rome and Xavier Worthy, and then obviously way up there, Neighbors and Marvin Harrison. So he's the lowest of that range. He's easy to get to, especially at the turn where you can basically, if you're at the end of a round, you can get Evan Ingram and then Brian Thomas, and then like 3 rounds later get Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
And it's like, wow, that's a strong double stack.
Mm-hmm.
So we just like the flexibility where it provides, really easy to get to, but we're not going overweight or crazy. We're right at the field with him as well. So, and then we'll wrap it up with this tier. Cortland Sutton, who's the lowest ranked wide receiver 1 on in terms of ADP. We're a little bit higher on him, and we're getting some shares because just by default he should be walking into 100+ targets again.
Right. And then moving to tier 5, this tier is actually 16 total players.
It's crazy.
Yeah, couldn't really break it up. But starting with Christian Watson, he's a guy that, we don't know what's going to happen because he recently had the whole hamstring difference. I don't remember what the difference in size was, but it was not good. And I'm higher on him than you are. And Jaden Reed talk, which is he's also in this tier. We'll talk about him in a second. But it's like, can he come back? Can he not? Can he stay healthy? Did this offseason really help him as much as we're talking about? And if it did, hopefully it helps other players,
Yeah, I mean, Christian Watson, and I think the kind of disagreement between us isn't necessarily where he's at. We're both higher on him in
Right.
compared to ADP. It's more so that we think that gap, there's a difference. I think it's a little bit wider with Jaden Reed, but then you think it's closer. You're probably right, based on where our rankings are right now. And again, it's who you can afford and who you want to stack a Jordan Love with, because it's a very reasonable schedule. In terms of who they have to face towards the end of the season, and I mean, everybody's really going at a pretty good value, and you just kind of got to get it all right. But I can tell you that not all 4 wide receivers are going to be worthy of being 11th round and above picks.
Right.
But everybody's going in the 7th to 11th range. Mm-hmm. So who is the ones? And probably 2 of them, optimistically 3 can pan out, but we just don't know.
And then there's the question: is Jordan Love the guy that can push them?
Yeah, because if he sucks, then all of them will fail.
And he only did it for so long last year. He only, 7 games, I believe?
Yeah, it was like a 7-8 game sample size towards the end of the season. Before that, he was Desmond Ridder. I've said that before.
Yeah, so...
And, it's not a shock, but when you see the contract that he's about to get, you will start saying similar things if he shows some inconsistencies.
Well, we talked about Trevor Lawrence's contract for a long time on everything, so we'll see. Mm-hmm. But then let's jump up to Xavier Worthy. He's just a guy that, went to the perfect situation and should be able to stay in this range and be solid as a wide receiver 3 or 4. I don't know if he has the insane upside like some people are trying to push him to because of the situation.
Right.
With Marquise Brown there,
Yeah, I mean, before we even started seeing ADPs in best ball, and we're a month into it now, I was really thinking that Xavier Worthy I was going to get a ton of, because in my mind he was going to go in the range where Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney were going last year, which is 95 to 100,
right,
or even 110 if it fell the right way. But right now he's going 62nd in some places, and it's just too uncomfortable of a range for me. Our ranking in terms of consensus is 2 below, so it's really close, but we thought we were going to get a value there,
right,
and we're not. So it's just in best ball, especially, the rookies are just so highly vaulted this year that it's just we weren't getting nearly as much as we thought we would. I mean, even Marvin Harrison Jr., we love generational prospect, and he's going right where we have him ranked. So it's well, we can't go 30% owned of him because that doesn't make any sense when we're not getting value. Mm-hmm. That's just kind of how I view it with him, and similar a couple of other guys as well. Really, Keon Coleman's the only rookie that truly is above consensus right now, and it's mainly just because he's really walking into an opportunity to be a 1,200-yard receiver if he proves it. I don't see a world where Xavier Worthy instantly out of the gate is a 1,200-yard receiver.
Right.
And he'll get the occasional, deep bomb and stuff like that, but he's really light. And I'm a Texas fan. I saw a lot of goal line drops as well. He could have had even better numbers. So I would just kind of hold down the ownership a little bit, keep it a little reasonable if you're going that route. But obviously, Marquise Brown, jump up a little bit. He's in this tier as well. He's rising right now. He's going into the almost top 50.
Yeah,
and
he's way up there now.
We don't know. Even if you want to put in the Rashee Rice conversation, we just don't know long term how that's going to end. And when you're going in a wide receiver 3 or high end or low end wide receiver 2 range, you need to just have a consistent guy that can get you 15 to 20 every week.
Right.
And I think he's a little more boom bust as well. That's why, we're slightly below him in terms of consensus.
Well, I will say, Xavier Worthy, on our videos that we did when we did the draft, he was not above some of those guys we have talked about, Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, Rome. All those guys are more talented right now. But he has the opportunities, and he has the perfect offense. So then Jordan Addison, Minnesota. T.J. Hawkinson's going to be out for 6 games minimum, I believe. So it's Jordan Addison as the number 2 option for Sam Darnold. It doesn't sound terrible, but it's just you don't know how that's going to go. You don't know if Sam Darnold can put it together. You don't know if J.J. McCarthy has to come in and be the quarterback, and sounds like they might have to run the ball more if that happens. It's just one of those weird teams, and I actually have 0% of Jordan Addison at the moment.
He's one of the hardest players to rank right now. I mean, he finishes his rookie year, very solid year, wide receiver 27. A lot of that has to do with
Injuries.
Justin Jefferson missing half the year. But there's also a massive, downturn in terms of, I'm not even going to say talent, because I like that Sam Darnold's finally in a reasonable situation.
Right.
I feel terrible that he's had to do that. And obviously I'm not saying, oh, if it was him over Purdy, they would have gone to this. I'm not even going to go that route. I'm just saying that he was a top 5 pick for a reason, because he had, upside for it. And he just went to the god-awful worst situation. I don't know if you saw tweets of Le'Veon Bell saying they had 2nd and 10, and Adam Gase more often than not would say, just run and give me 3 yards to get it 3rd and manageable. Like, those kinds of coaching is what he inherited, and the receiving core awful. Regardless, doesn't matter. Kirk Cousins, whether you like him or not, fantasy purposes, he's been one of the most reliable quarterbacks in the last 8 years.
Right.
And he's no longer there. So whether it's Sam Darnold or eventually J.J. McCarthy, I don't think he will be relevant at all this year. However, it's going to be low volume. And so if you have a high target hog in Justin Jefferson, can you support another one?
Mm-hmm.
Because Justin Jefferson, when TJ's out, he's going to get like 35-40% target share. And Jordan Addison, he's going to get a healthy 20 to 25.
Right.
But if it's only 25 attempts in the game, that's really only about 6-7 targets. So is he a 1,000-yard threat? I don't think so. And right now he's just kind of going a little lower than a little higher than what we like.
Right, for sure. And then Deontay Johnson, we talked about him a little bit earlier. Another Panthers guy. He's the highest of the Panthers, and he's deserving of that because currently, he might be coming to a new team, but he is the one guy that has been very consistent target-wise. He's a guy that I drafted a lot actually last year, and he, he's a little hard to decide if this is too high or too low, but because of the fact that we don't know what's going to happen with Bryce Young, we don't know what's going to happen with all these rookies that are there, and if he's going to be the guy.
So he's obviously coming off his worst season since his rookie year. 51 catches and 700 yards and 5 touchdowns is just awful.
Oh, yeah.
But also, we look at the fact that 3 years prior, when he actually didn't have arguably the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL, 144 targets, 170 targets, 147 targets. He's just a high target guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bryce Young guy, you're going to look for reliable targets. And that's why Adam Thielen, who's a reliable target for years, he just, has some injury issues. And Deontay Johnson, that's why those guys are so much more valuable. And I'm not saying that he's going to be just throughout the year a top 15 wide receiver, but
right.
He's one of the best bets in this entire range. If I were to say who of these guys could possibly be a wide receiver 2 throughout the year, him. And it's just because if he gets 130, 40 targets, by default, he's going to have 90 receptions. And he's just going to fall into the end zone a couple times, and all of a sudden he's a wide receiver 26, and he's going wide receiver 44.
Right. Absolutely.
Do the math.
Yeah, and we saw Adam Thielen last year get 10, 12 targets at times.
In a month where he was, winning a lot of money for people.
Oh, yeah. And so that guy can do it. Deontay Johnson, much younger, probably a better athlete. I think that he could do it too, and then DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley's also in this range, but we'll get to him in a minute. But DeAndre Hopkins is a guy that, just that can do it. Going to hopefully help a young quarterback. That's the biggest question mark on that offense right now is the young quarterback. But I expect them to be trailing. They're going to be throwing the ball. They don't have a true big style running back, so they're going to try to throw the ball as much as possible. And DeAndre Hopkins just continues to be solid at football.
Yeah, we have him as wide receiver 38. And I feel like that's too low, but I just couldn't justify putting him higher. But regardless, the 28 to 43, I know that it's a 16 spot difference, but I promise you, if you take Christian Watson as your wide receiver 4 over Malik Neighbors, who you have to take as your wide receiver 2, like that is so much better of a value for your team. So I'm not saying that it's that big of a deal. It's where you're going. And right now he's going into the 7th round, early 8th round. And I really like that ADP range on it. And I'm starting to really get some share of him.
I have a lot of him.
So, I mean, the path is there. I mean, the age is one thing, but he's been a fairly durable player throughout most of his career. And,
right.
Consistently 12 to 14 is what he got you last year. And then the year before that, obviously, he was suspended. And then he had a couple games where he went down with an injury. And then, Kyler also got hurt at the same time, essentially. But he was averaging about 18 points a game.
Right.
That was his age 30 season. So,
well, I guess to kind of put it into perspective, those 3 rookies that we talked about earlier are all going in the same range as him.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're picking, you have DeAndre Hopkins, Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, all those guys, Keon Coleman, in that range. It's like, well, I could just take the vet and be more confident.
He kind of feels a little bit like Mike Evans last year, where he was going in basically the same range as the top, or like a wide receiver 35 at the time, and late 7th round, and he's always getting 1,000 yards. So
right.
DeAndre Hopkins, had a higher peak than Mike Evans, but I think the legs are still the tread is still on the tires for that. He can still have another 1,000-yard receiver. I think his game ages well because he doesn't rely on his burner speed. It's moving the chains routes and over the middle.
Yeah, he just
protects his body
good
well.
Hands type of guy.
Exactly. So I'm not saying he can go all the way like Larry Fitzgerald to 38 and be productive, but
we got the same name. That's
yeah.
funny.
So. But I think his game age is way better than somebody like Julio Jones, who when he went to Tennessee, it was instant fade, and because he relied on his athleticism, and it just after injuries, it just went completely out.
Right, absolutely. And then Tank Dell, 3-headed monster in Houston. Tank Dell is by far one of our lowest negative differentials. It's a thing that we just have to do because how can Stephon Diggs come to the Texans and be a number 3 option? How can Nico Collins not repeat as the red zone threat? Where does Tank Dell fit in other than intermediate routes and 7 targets a game? And that's good. Don't get me wrong. That's great for a wide receiver 3 on a team. That's not good for the 26 overall wide receiver, though.
I don't think I've ever seen 3 receivers, and I'm not saying skill players, 3 receivers from the same team go in the first 3 rounds. And that's happening this year.
And the quarterback in the 4th, 5th.
Yeah. Basically, somebody is going to be massively wrong. He will have his games of 20 to 25 points, and I don't want to hear if he goes game 1 and he goes 6 targets and 5 for 100 and a touchdown that we're wrong. We're talking about consistency throughout the year. And he had his stretch where he was actually outproducing Nico Collins.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't see them bringing in Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon, veterans, high target and touch veterans, and just say, oh, we're still going to give 120 targets to Tank Dell. And he's going to be, top of the league in terms of yards per catch and 1,000-yard thread and stuff. I just... The math isn't adding up, and right now, like I said, you got to invest a 3rd-round pick in that. In redraft, he's probably going to end up as a 4th, I would say, because running backs kind of get pushed up a little bit. We're taking a stand. We're going to get some flack because there's Tank Dell lovers everywhere, and we have to be take a stand on somebody. We can't just put them all together and be like, oh, we like them all. Choose one.
Yeah,
we're a value-based thing, and we have Stephon Diggs higher than probably most are going to have him. But we're taking a stand that Stephon Diggs is going to have 130 targets, 90 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And Nico is going to be a very similar play. And we don't see very often 3 1,000-yard receivers from the same team.
Right, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have to throw the ball 700 times for that to work.
And if that works out, C.J. Stroud going at quarterback 6 is criminal.
And we have a lot of him. So I'm okay with that.
But it's like the math isn't adding up.
Yeah.
And that's why we're just kind of I really don't think I have a single share of him because he started high and he's risen higher.
Yeah, even in my CJ Stroud stacks, they're mostly Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins. If I double stack, it's those two. I would have to wait till the 6th round to get Tank Dell, and he's just long gone. Long gone.
So I'm going 29th overall today.
Man, I saw him go over Nico Collins.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, wow.
Listen, and there's going to be people that sway you, but if you're taking a chance, I think that's one of the highest risk players in the entire pool of receivers this year. And that's why he's so low. In week to week, he can outscore anybody.
Right.
But we're talking consistency throughout the year when you have to make sit decisions. And when he gets you 4 points because he only had 4 targets that week, don't be upset.
Right.
Because you invested that much in him.
Well, and also, like, we like him. He's from Houston. He went to Houston. We were excited that he got picked by the Texans. We debated last year if it was John Mechie or if it was Tank Dell. We've had this conversation, but that was at 200, 170. This is at 35, 40, and I'm just not. Yeah, like I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
So, and then the next grouping in tier 5, Chris Godwin, a guy that just keeps doing it, been doing it. He's 32, I believe. Or he's about to go, or on his 32 year.
No, he hasn't hit 30 yet.
He's on 30?
No.
Am I thinking Mike Evans?
Mike Evans just hit 30.
Okay.
I think he's 31. But yeah, Chris Godwin is entering his age 28 season.
Oh, wow. He's much younger than I thought, actually. Okay. Well, that makes me feel a lot better because he feels like he's been around forever. Mm-hmm. Solid player, though. Kind of reminds me of Tyler Lockett, but doesn't have a receiver 2 that we're expecting to be higher than him. He's the number 2 in this offense. Just Baker got paid because he deserved it. He's going to get the ball to him. I think that this is a solid point in the rank to put him.
Yeah, I mean, with him, he has the volume. I mean, even last year, it was considered a down year.
Yeah.
He only had 2 touchdowns, but he had 130 targets, 83 catches, over 1,000 yards. 4 out of 5 seasons, last 5 years with 1,000 yards. I think more touchdowns are due. He's dealt with some injuries, so that is always a concern. Last year, he actually played all 17 games and ironically had his worst production. But, I mean, they're going to, you would think, play from behind or, in consistently competitive games because even though they have one of the easiest strength of the schedule, they had a regression from their roster.
Right.
And they probably overachieved last year, finishing 9-8, winning a playoff game. And we love it. We're rooting for Baker. It's awesome. But, more often than not, they're probably closer to the 20th best team than they are the 10th. And so that means that even bad teams, they should probably be in competitive games with. So consistently, they'll be putting out passing volume, one of the worst efficiencies in rushing production over the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
The volume's there, and his ADP is just not there. Obviously, Mike Evans had a great year. He basically had all the touchdowns last year.
Right.
I would expect to level out 60-40-ish.
Right,
again.
of course.
And, he can be just a reliable thread, and he's got one of the easiest strengths of schedule for the last 6 weeks of the year. Love to see it. And as long as he's on the field, he should be a good return in value right now. He's going wide receiver 36 on average right now.
I think, there's certain guys that are risky and there's certain guys that are safe. And this just feels like a really safe pick as long as the only worry is the injury.
I think the upside of the 11 catches and 120 yards that he had with Tom Brady, I don't think I don't think that's any longer in his bag.
Right.
But getting the consistent 7 to 8 targets, 5 to 6 catches every week, it will add up over time. And like I said, if he's on the field, that should be a nice return in the 8th round where he's going.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our biggest positive differential is Jackson Smith and Jigba. JSN is we expect to be the number 2 in Seattle. He plays in the slot a lot, and he's just kind of edging. It just feels like he's going to edge out Tyler Lockett this time around. We have him much higher because we think, he could get the 120, 130 targets. And that's in that offense. They have been very productive.
Yeah, I mean, he was our wide receiver 1 in his class in 2022. It was a relatively weaker one, but we thought he had upside. But he usually the breakout year comes in right before the draft, and he had his breakout year right the year before that,
Right.
and then went down with an injury, and so it was just like you're betting on potential. But also he went into a bad fit because DK is there. He's a young guy that they want to be a one, and then Lockett, like you said, consistent production was always there, and they ran a ton of two receiver sets.
Right.
So it just was perfect, poor storm for him to have a great rookie year. And, I didn't get, I think I got about 15, 20% last year as an 8th round pick, and his ADP moved down while these unproven rookies are higher than him.
Right.
And I just don't get it. He's coming from, his OC is now the Washington Huskies coordinator that took him to the national championship that had 3 1,000-yard receivers and, a near Heisman winner, Michael Penix.
Mm-hmm.
It just fits him so well. And I think in PPR especially, we're going to find out very early how involved he'll be with the team. He's been healthy this year. He also had a thumb injury last year that knocked him out for most of the preseason. And then I think he missed week 1 as well.
Right.
So it was kind of a slow grind into the year as well. Just not a lot went right. And then now everything's kind of going his way. And that's why we like him so much. And I checked the other day on DraftKings. I have over 50% of him.
Wow.
And that is almost a cardinal sin in best ball. But he's going like 95th overall. And a lot of those ownership, he fell to the hundreds. Right. I was like, I'm going to pass on him because I've already gotten some. Oh, no, he's there the next round. Yeah.
He's still here.
Let's take a chance. I mean, I've got him as a wide receiver 5, as a wide receiver 6. It's just as good as it can get.
Yeah.
And if he swaps the production with Tyler Lockett, who's been a consistent top 27, 28 wide receiver, going as a wide receiver 45, like, give me all of it.
Yep, I completely agree. And then if you move up one spot to Christian Kirk, kind of going exactly where he's, at. And he's probably going to be the number 1 receiver there. He's going to be a guy that he runs a lot of different kinds of routes, comes out of the slot, comes out from outside. So he's productive for those reasons, but I just don't think he's a number 1 receiver in an offense normally. And that's why Brian Thomas is actually very interesting to me. But Christian Kirk, deserving of where he's at.
Yeah, I mean, he got, he was one of the first ones to reset the market for wide receiver 2s.
Right.
I mean, that was the offseason where Jerry Jones came out and just was publicly against paying Amari Cooper $20 million, and then he trades him for a stack of peanuts, and then Christian Kirk gets $20 million,
mm-hmm.
and then Tyreek Hill gets 30, and then this avalanche just comes. And last year, I mean, this was after bringing in Calvin Ridley from suspension / retirement, whatever you want to call it, and he was the more consistent receiver in the weeks that he was healthy, and then he went down with a groin injury right as Trevor Lawrence started getting banged up, and then Jacksonville just kind of plummeted, and the expectation for them is just low right now. But I mean, we look back the previous year, in his first year with Trevor Lawrence, without Calvin Ridley, 133 targets, 84 receptions, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. And he's a gadget guy that can occasionally get the end around.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sign me up. The only thing is, everybody else is on board with that as well.
Right.
So, you got to pay up for him. He's starting to kind of approach top 50 status. That's not necessarily where we have him. I think we have him right around 62.
Yeah.
So it's below ADP from there. ESPN has him at 91. And it's just like, what are we doing?
Wow.
So we're just talking value. It's a great stack. It's really easy to get to Jacksonville. We talked about that earlier with Brian Thomas. Gabe Davis is in these rankings, but same thing. Evan Ingram, we love. We talked about him in our tight end rankings. I mean, it's just all there. He's safe, and if you can get a value on him, he can produce an upside season like we saw in 2022.
Right, and then Calvin Ridley, the other tandem of the Tennessee offense. I was actually surprised that we weren't closer between the two of them, where they were like a little smushed, but at the same time, this is a tier 5. Like it's just you could put this guy at the top or the bottom, and it's fine. But Calvin Ridley going there, better route runner, more of I don't know who was more friendly to a young quarterback that hasn't proved himself that people are really high on. I don't know which receiver's style is, but Calvin Ridley has a chance to be the number one there, and if he is, I think that 32nd is great value.
Yeah, I mean, with Calvin Ridley, the situations they're similar to DeAndre Hopkins, that he can be a 1,000-yard receiver in a more pass-friendly offense that is going to be trailing. That's what they've kind of garnered toward. Now that Derrick Henry's no longer there, he's probably my most uncomfortable receiver in this range in terms of just like, is he too high? Even like Tank Dell, we don't love his ADP, but I feel like, might be a little too harsh on him, maybe. Or, but like Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, like you said, right on, should be kind of close together. Maybe in our second rankings they will be. We're not getting a ton of Calvin Ridley in the 6th round range, but I mean, the a lot of times when you're building these rosters, like you don't have to agree with us and the ownerships that we display and talk to you about with these best ball drafts, but if you can tell a story of how these players are going to produce, then I'm on board. And so if Calvin Ridley is your wide receiver 4, and it's a wide receiver 1 in an offense, and you don't trust DeAndre Hopkins' health, or he could be a trade candidate,
right,
or Treylon Burks never comes into his own, and Tyler Boyd's a non-factor, and obviously Chigo Okonkwo is not fantasy relevant, and they're not going to run the ball a ton, the story's there. It's just the gut feeling just feels like he's not going to be reliable enough. I mean, I had him on a lot of my redraft teams last year, and a lot of times it was just too frustratingly inconsistent.
Right.
And the upside wasn't there enough to warrant these bad plays, because it wasn't like a George Kittle where, his good weeks he's going to get you 30, but his bad weeks you'll have to live with some 5 or 6. Calvin Ridley's great weeks was like 18, and his bad weeks was like 5.
Right.
And it's like, I drafted you pretty high. I need a little more from you.
Right.
And
exactly.
So that was probably not a great return on investment. And so, he is an older, even though he doesn't have a ton of years in the league, he is older. Like, he is entering his 29 season, I believe. And, again, paint the picture. That it's your decision. Just go with your gut if it's a good value for you. But the path is there for him to succeed.
Right. Yeah. And then we talked about Jaden Reed a little bit earlier. So just like we said, a guy that was good, consistent last year, but then you like telling the story about the Dallas game in the playoffs. They win by 30 points in that game.
Well, they were up by 30.
Or up by 30 in that game. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Jaden Reed has 0 catches, 0 fantasy points. Interesting to just think about, because he's the number 1 receiver for their team on this ranking. So that's how deep they are, and you can't have that type of week in week 17.
Right. I mean, yeah, that would be an absolute just travesty.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm trying to think
terrible
the description word, but yeah, I mean, yeah, with him, he was by far the most consistent receiver last year for them. He is Deebo Samuel light. He finishes wide receiver 28 in his rookie year. 90 targets is not crazy good, but he had 10 touchdowns. He had 119 rushing yards, so add that a little bit more to his total. 13.5 points a game, though. Like, as a rookie, that's pretty solid for, the return that he got, but just low volume.
Right,
that he receives. And again, just with Green Bay, not all of them are going to pan out. So right now he's creeping into the early 6th round, low rich. So if you think it is closer with Christian Watson, or even want to take some stabs at Romeo Doubs, who just missed the list, or Dontavius Wicks, for some reason you believe in him season long, like, completely avoid him at this range. Because you'll get much better value in a couple rounds after that. He's just kind of right in the middle, and probably a tad bit too high. And even though we have him above somebody like JSN or Chris Godwin, we've gotten so many more shares of them.
Oh yeah,
over Jaden Reed.
Yeah, especially at their current price. 2 Browns is what it is basically between him and Christian Watson. Take your pick, basically. And then Terry McLaurin, Washington, it's number 1. This is probably a pretty solid spot for him if you believe in Jaden Daniels. If you don't believe in Jaden Daniels, he's still the number 1 receiver in the offense. He's still going to get the opportunities. They're still going to scheme it up for him. But it makes it a little bit more murky.
He is exactly what we talked about Tyler Lockett and a little more. I mean, he has missed 2 games in the last 4 seasons, 3 straight years of playing every game, 130 targets, 120, 130, 134.
Right.
77, 79, 77, 87 receptions, over 1,050 yards every year. Problem is low touchdown production.
Mm-hmm.
And with rookies, you don't expect the 25, 30 passing touchdowns, which limits the upside of said receiver. That's why somebody like Chris Olave last year I was a little lower on, which obviously not a rookie quarterback, but somebody that Derek Carr comes in and he's not a high volume touchdown producer, and Chris Olave has never been that guy. And I remember when we were looking at season long props, and you were like, I love Chris Godwin over 4.5, and I was just like, I can see it, but I don't know if it can happen.
It just felt low.
Yeah,
right.
It felt low, but it ended up going that low. And so, like with Terry McLaurin, you see consensus ADP is 33. He's wide receiver 1. You know, he's never had a below, I believe, 30 wide receiver 30 season.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, he's never had it above a 20. So he's as safe as you can get. But is the upside there? The good thing this year is his ADP is actually down to the 5th, 6th round range, so it's reasonable to get to. But I mean, how much more does he go up with his rookie quarterback? I just don't know.
Right. And then T. Higgins, the number 2 for Cincinnati. Cincinnati could hold 3 players in the top 50. That's not even a concern. With Joe Burrow at quarterback, T. Higgins signing his franchise tag. Happy to be back. Hopefully he is able to produce, but he's a little inconsistent and he's had injuries. He's, even when Jamar Chase was out at times, he wasn't that productive. It was Tyler Boyd at times that was more productive than him. I like T. Higgins as a player, don't get me wrong, but he kind of makes it a little bit more muddy for me with Jamar Chase more than me actually wanting to pick him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with T. Higgins is just his price has just dropped immensely, like 2 rounds plus, and it's in the range where you can get, if you were able to get Jamar Chase in the top 5, go for it, and then you can get him in the 5th round, and then at the 7th round you can get Joe Burrow, and it's just one of the easiest double stacks to get for in a potentially league-leading pass situation.
Right.
Tyler Boyd in the Joe Burrow era was never below a wide receiver 50. So he was getting targets, even though he was a wide receiver 3. And sometimes 2, he's gone. Joe Mixon, who's actually had a decent amount of targets, is gone. And also run volume, and they replace him with Zach Moss, who, if you believe in him, cool. If you believe in Chase Brown, cool. Doesn't matter. Neither one are going to have 300 carries.
Right.
So passing volume will be there, and if Joe Burrow is healthy, both of them should be Debo and Brandon Ayuk, where they're both going in the 2nd round. Like, T. Higgins is talented enough to be in that range. And right now, just because of his down year last year, Joe Burrow also getting hurt, he's just lower than most. We actually have him a little lower in terms of ADP, but I'm completely fine with him where he's going. It's just there's just so many guys in this range.
Yeah, that's wide receiver galore.
Yep.
And then the second highest rookie on this list is Malik Neighbors. I've seen Malik Neighbors go in the 2nd round multiple times. He is our 28th receiver. He wouldn't even make it in the
I saw him go in the 2nd round today.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. So I'm just not getting him. I can't get him, and I have to pick him that high. It's just not reasonable.
If it wasn't for, and this is not wide receiver rank, this is overall ADP rank. if it wasn't for Marvin Harrison Jr., he would have the highest rookie ADP as a wide receiver in history.
Yes.
When Amari Cooper, he was wide receiver 17 when he was a rookie back in 2014. He was going around the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And Malik Neighbors right now in June is going in the 30s and 20s now with maybe Daniel Jones at quarterback. And it's just a little too, way too scary where he's going. But I see the reason why, because he's so talented.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, I think the realm it's really easy to, I think, project a stat line for him where he gets 80 touches, 1,000 yards, but like 4 scores.
Yes.
And that is going to be wide receiver 27.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like, are they going to score touchdowns? Are they going to, like, that's great that he's the number one option, but how many points are you expecting out of the Giants every game?
Right.
14? 15? On average? Like, I just don't see a way for him to be the beneficiary of scoring. And if he doesn't, I don't think he can get 1,300 plus receiving yards. And that's
like I said, even if he does, I just don't see the touchdown production. And that's where the separator is between wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 1.
Right.
Is just these guys can have 10 plus or even flirt with 20. And I just don't even see him flirting with 6.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird thing. And of course, he didn't even make it into our tier 4, but he's going in the top 24.
And maybe he deserves to be in tier 4, but because of where his ADP, that is probably the most atrocious ADP. And we hate Derrick Henry. And that it's even worse than that, based on where he's going and the group, because separating him and, like, I can go down the list, like, him and D-Hop, to me, aren't that far between each other. And he's going sometimes now, like I said, he won the second round today. That is a top 12 receiver. And DeAndre Hopkins is going around wide receiver 40.
Right.
Big gap. And it's just way too wide for us. That's why I think he kind of fell into the 5th tier instead of the 4th tier. Too talented to be in this tier. But guess what? All these guys are.
Yeah. And I want to say this before we go, because Malik Neighbors is top in like 32, I think is his average rank on DraftKings. On DraftKings Best Ball. JSN's 95. Like, I'd much rather take somebody else at that point. You get Josh Allen, the number 1 quarterback. You could get
number 1 tight end,
Travis Etienne, if you wanted to.
Running back 1.
Yeah, it's like, why not do that and then get JSN in the 8th round? I don't get it. It's just
you gotta do the tandem thing. It's not just this guy versus that guy, because it's not always just take your pick. They're the same price. Like, I promise you, Malik Neighbors we do auction drafts. He's not going to go at the same price as a lot of these guys, and people are going to fall in love with him being a rookie. And I'm just going to be like, I will spend my money elsewhere.
A lot of people fell in love with Darren Waller last year. How'd that go?
Exactly.
So, so we're going to wrap it up. We're going to have a second wide receiver video for our top 4 tiers, but those are the 60 to 28, our first 4 tiers. And we appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with us. And go like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what you disliked or liked, who you think shouldn't even be on this video and should be on the next video. We're okay. We're all ears for that, and we appreciate y'all being with us. So.
Yeah, we appreciate you tuning in. Please watch the part 2. It'll be linked in the description below. We also did our quarterback rankings that were released. We have a running back rankings video that should be out by the time this is released as well. So go comment and like on those tight ends as well. I mean, it's ranking season. We're doing these best balls every day, essentially. We're live streaming every week now. Getting more comfortable, confident in where we're targeting guys and where we see it. And those ADPs and redraft, if you don't do best ball, we're going to start catching up and kind of being more refined as well. So stay tuned for all that. It's a lot of fun. And we just can't stop talking enough about these things.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all being here, and we'll see y'all next time.